Good morning, everyone. This is James Cadman from the Supply Chain School, Action Sustainability. I've got my colleague Charles Nord on the line as well. Do you want to just say hi, Charles?
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, just a bit of time to get off mute.
So thank you for joining this morning. Apologies if you were trying to get on yesterday's webinar that we were going to have around lunchtime. As you'll have probably read, we were having difficulties with the Click Meeting platform, but today it is working. We understand that they are beavering away with their service to make sure that things are working smoothly. Just to say at the top of the call, we are recording this webinar and we'll be circulating that afterwards, and likewise the slides that we're going to show with you today, so you can circulate those to colleagues and refer to them later. We can see on the webinar that we've got lots of people joining. Thank you for making time for joining. If you do have any questions, do write them down in the chat function on the bottom right hand corner of your screen, and colleagues will look at those, and some of them will be answered through the chat function. Others will be forwarded to myself or Charles to speak to, so hopefully we'll be able to get through all of your questions. We're going to take a similar format to what we did back in January, but now that we're 2 or 3 months further on, we'd like to take people through how the tool works again, to give you the assurance and confidence of how to use the tool as we get into the process of rolling out the registrations and the logins and so on, to enable you to input your data for the 3 months that we are coming to the end of, January, February, March. So I'm going to kick off and give a brief overview again on the purpose of the Climate Action Group. Many of you will have seen this before, but it's good to just remind us all what we're doing. And for anyone who's joining afresh, it will be a good introduction as to what we're doing. So, quick overview of what we're going to cover, a reminder of what the Climate Action Group is about, some of the information around the carbon performance metrics and how we'll be measuring scopes 1, 2 and 3 for carbon, and then we'll get into a demonstration of the tool itself, which I think is the main reason that most people are joining, of course. It's how we use the online tool to input and gather data. So the Climate Action Group. We're clearly looking to drive carbon emission reductions. Notwithstanding the current situation, climate change is not going away. I've already had a thought about seeing a graph in a year or two's time where we can plot our carbon emissions globally, and we'll see a dip for the current period and the restrictions on travel and so on, but the underlying problem remains. So we still need to carry on dealing with climate change. We're looking to understand the scale of the issue, where our priorities lie, and how we can actively reduce those. And to do those, clearly, we need to gather data. We need to be able to have some information to help manage those emissions. And to do that, we're going to have 2 parallel streams. There's using the supply chain performance tool that Action Sustainability runs, and use that in the school for carbon, and importantly, provide learning content alongside that. And the school has a wealth of learning content already, but we'll be looking to add to that and develop it where necessary. The timescale that you can see on your slide now is an indicative timescale. We are in a pilot phase, as you know, gathering data on a quarterly basis. It was agreed in the working groups that quarterly seemed the best compromise between all the different timescales that we could gather data on. We're coming to the end of that first quarterly period, looking to input carbon data for January, February, March, during the months of April and May, depending on how quickly you can gather that data yourselves, whether it's electricity data, whether it's fuel consumption, travel data, and so on. And then as we go through 2020, again, notwithstanding current situations, providing more support through the tool in terms of the learning piece, but starting to gather and assess the data that we've collected. Can we start seeing any trends? Can we see any hotspots that are coming out? And then have that feedback loop with suppliers and contractors about, well, where can we actually make active reductions? What we're doing is, of course, is more than just measuring and coming out with a number. It's actively doing something about that number. And over time, we can bring more contractors and suppliers in. So a call to all the partners on the call today. If you've got other contractors or suppliers you'd like to include in this, just get in touch. There is no closing date as such for anyone to join. The only thing that we would say is that because we're working on a quarterly basis, it makes it neater, in inverted commas, for the data process if people join at a suitable quarterly period. But yes, if you do have other suppliers who have been a bit reticent or a bit unsure or just weren't aware and you do want to get them involved, just give us a shout. So the benefits of engagement, I don't really need to tell you these, but they're in the slide pack if you need to use it with colleagues and other contractors. Clearly, we want to have leadership. We want to work together and use the collaborative power of the supply chain school to do something that's consistent and proactive in managing and measuring our carbon emissions. And clearly, it will provide us with information about where the priorities are for action, and we can undertake various activities to reduce our emissions. And being transparent with what we're doing, we're engaging with other bodies in the built environment and collaborating where we can. Yes, I'm not going to go into this slide now, but it's in the slide deck if you need to use this with colleagues or other suppliers and contractors to explain the concept of scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. Having looked at the names of who's joined the call, I recognise that pretty much all of you understand this already, but as I say, it's in the slide deck should you need to describe the differences between those different scopes for people. And similarly, this slide, which kind of tries to explain the concept of what we're doing, that the scope 3 emissions of someone at tier 0, a client organization, their scope 3 emissions are built up by the scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions of their supply chain. So there's that kind of cascade process which helps explain the issue, but also overcome the standard response of, well, aren't we double counting? Well, yes, we are deliberately double counting, but for the reasons that for someone it's a scope 3 and for someone else it's a scope 1 or a 2. So we can help explain that situation. The metrics themselves, this is an edited version so it can fit on one slide, but we're focusing primarily on scope 1 and 2 emissions of your contractors and your suppliers. And as we go further up the supply chain, we pick up more scope 1 and 2 emissions and build a bigger picture. We are looking at scope 3 emissions as well for business travel. So for vehicles that are not owned by your own organization, for logistics, business travel and so on. So that's part of it, particularly for those distribution businesses, but also materials that have potentially high carbon impact, carbon intensity, embodied carbon. We have to be clear here that if we are working with contractors who simply install or fit those kinds of materials, then we want them to focus on scope 1 and 2. We're looking at those organizations, those industries that actually manufacture those materials and what goes into manufacturing them, because we do want to avoid double counting of embodied carbon in this case. The trial period, we're in it now. It's a clear process where we want to get people involved, test the tool at scale with lots of people involved, lots of contractors and suppliers involved and clients as well. And this slide talks to what we're trying to do over the 12 months from January 2020, developing the process of capturing that data, understanding what our scope and boundaries are, what are we including and what are we not including, how are we capturing that data, and something that Charles will get into in a minute in terms of the actual tool itself. It's identifying key people within your organization who are responsible for the data, gathering it and inputting it, or having a team of people who are identified to do that to increase accuracy and reliability. The tool has been developed beyond what it was 6 months ago to allow for 2 extra functionalities. One of those is absolute versus relative emissions. So at the right point, we'll be asking organizations to input some important information that will act as a denominator to allow us to understand what the relative emissions are per unit of output. Many of you report on this already, so we think it is important to do so, but to have both absolute emissions, pure tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emitted, but also that relative to see how efficient the organization is being. And hopefully over time we'll be able to get some benchmarking out of this based on different trades and categories that are inputting data. And then the final piece of that jigsaw is the apportionment process. So going back to my earlier slide with all the circles and the dotted arrows going into them, what is useful is to understand, if you're an organization further down the supply chain, what your scope 3 emissions are and where they're coming from. So the tool has been adapted now so it can do an apportionment process. What this simply means is that a supplier or contractor inputs their consumption, kilowatt hours, litres of fuel and so on, And then they can also say what the split is between their clients in terms of their business and how much business they do with different clients. Cool. This slide provides a bit more information on the process, gathering data in the different quarters and uploading it, and when people will be able to upload that data. So again, that's there for reference. I won't go into the detail of it now, but essentially we're working on this quarterly process for uploading data. Again, Charles will mention this, but we have an automated system to remind people of when and what they need to do. So there is support from us that it's not all left to you to put it in your calendars, to make sure that things happen when they do. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Charles in a second. I'm just going to deal with one question that's come through about normalizing supplier carbon data anyway. In terms of the normalization, we will be asking suppliers to put in some data that gives an indication of the size of their business. So it could be turnover. We are aware that that has caused or raised concerns in terms of sensitivity of data, but using a metric, whether it's turnover or gross internal floor area, a suitable metric that is relevant to that organization so that they can demonstrate the relative performance of their carbon emissions. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Charles now. If you want to pick up on the sustainability tool demonstration, that'd be great.
Thank you, James. So I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. So I'm going to ask that you make sure you have the Click Meeting window open, and that you can see the screen that I'm sharing. Just wait a few seconds to enable everyone to do that. Okay, great. It seems like it's being shared. So many of you who have attended previous meetings of the Carbon SIG, or Climate Action Group, as we're now calling it, will have seen the tool. Today, I'm just going to walk you through how you report, and then that new functionality around apportioning your data to your various clients. So, in terms of a process, we're going to set everyone up individually with their own accounts in the sustainability tool, if you're a supplier and you're reporting data, you will essentially every 3 months you'll receive an email prompting you to report your carbon data for the past quarter. In that email, you'll get a link to this page in your own account, and essentially this is the data input page. Here you can see I'm on it's called a report due page. It's where I can enter my data. I can see my name, so I'm a school supplier, for example, part of the Climate Action Group, and this is where I'm reporting my data. You can see that in the title here. And then importantly, what I can see here is the dates for the periods that I'm reporting. So in this instance, I'm reporting in the second quarter, so April the 1st to June the 30th. That would be reported at some point in July once that period is finished. And then below, I can see all the entry fields that I need to complete. So you can see I've started entering some data so that you can see that. So if we take it line by line, we can have a look at how this works. So the first one is Scope 1 carbon emissions. And obviously, so this is in tons of carbon emissions. And we can see here there's a comment in there saying it's calculated from submetrics. So that's the tool that's doing an automatic calculation to calculate your Scope 1 carbon emissions from the data you're providing below. The second one here is carbon emissions from use of fossil fuels on site. Again, that's carbon emissions, so that's automatically calculated by the tool. And then below, we could go into the entry fields. So the first one we have is refuse derived fuel solid waste in tons, and we can see that I've entered 400 here. Let's say on the second one we use biomass wood pellets. If I want a more detailed description of what that is, I can hover on the little eye icon, which tells me what it is. So it's consumption of wood pellets on site for energy generation. And let's assume I use 60 tons of that. If I enter that information, we can see that my carbon emissions here at the top, the automatic calculations have updated. So there you go. If I start scrolling down the page, you can see all of this, all the input values that you need to respond against. On the right-hand column, there's a comments functionality. If you'd like to put some comments for you, just for a reminder for a later date. But essentially, if we scroll down this page, all these input fields correspond, where I've completed a few, they correspond to the metrics list that was sent out to everyone in that this whole group reviewed. We updated some of the fields based on your feedback, and as well as the definitions. So you should recognize all of those. Just slowly scrolling down so that you can see all of them. So there you go. So essentially, once every 3 months, as a supplier, if you're reporting your carbon data through the Climate Action Group, you'll need to complete this form. Just a note that on the right-hand side here, you can see ticks. That means that data that you've entered has automatically been saved, and therefore, if you close your browser, you lose internet connection. When you come back, your data will be there. So it means you don't need to complete this form in one go. You can sort of do so progressively as you want, as and when you collect the information. Once you're happy with the information you've provided, you might leave some fields blank just because you have no data, or that field is not applicable to your organization. Once you're happy with it, you can submit for approval. Here I'm just going to add a comment saying it's demo data for Q2. And you click on submit. You get a confirmation screen that asks you whether you're sure you want to submit your data for the correct reporting period. So we can check that again, April the 1st to June the 30th. Please note that the first reporting period that you'll be reporting against will be the 1st of January 2020 to the 31st of March 2020, and you'll be doing that in April. Once you're happy with it, you click on proceed, and you just wait for a success pop-up to appear. There we go. So that's your data that's been submitted, and as a result of the information you've provided, the tool's able to calculate your various scopes of carbon emissions. The next step is the tool will automatically take you to a page that shows the various reports you've submitted historically. So we can see that I've reported data for Q1, which is 1st of January 2020 to 31st of March 2020. And then I've just reported data for the 1st of April 2020 to 30th of June 2020, so Q2. We can see the name of the individual who did that. So in my case, I did it, I'm the administrator, but you'd have your name that appears here. You can then see the status, whether the data has been approved or rejected, and more on that in just a moment. You can see when it was last edited, again, the email address of the user, and then any comment that was provided. So we saw that in my example, when I submitted data there, I wrote demo data Q2. So in your organization, you can have one or several colleagues that are responsible for inputting the information on a quarterly basis. The next thing is that same individual or somebody else can be responsible for reviewing the data, sense checking it for any human errors or typos. So we call that individual the approver. It can be the same as the individual reporting, the reporter, or it can be someone different. But essentially, as soon as you've submitted your data, whoever is the assigned approver receives an email and says, come and verify the data for, in this instance, Q2. Come and verify your carbon data. There is a link in that email that would take you to this page here, where essentially it's the same input form, but you can't modify any of the information. You can just review it. So that colleague should be someone who's quite close to the data, who can just check that everything's in the correct scale, and that there haven't been any typos, and that where there are blanks is because those fields are not applicable to you, rather than the data just hasn't been entered or provided. Once you're happy with it, or if you're not, you can reject it. If you're happy with it, you can approve it. So when they approve, they write a little comment and they submit it. Once that step is done, it means that the data you've provided is deemed correct, and you're able to then apportion it to your various clients. So this is the additional step that we've had to build in the tool. So the administrator of your account will go to the reporting packages that you've submitted, and on the right hand side, what you can do is open the little menu and click on go to apportionment, and this is where you're going to be able to apportion your data to your various clients, and it takes you to this apportionment configuration page. So there are 4 sections to this page. The top section is where you set the amount you'd like to apportion to, the percentage you'd like to apportion to your various clients. Pending requests is where you have new clients that you'd like to apportion data to, and you need their approval to apportion your data to them. The clients box. Is where you have your list of clients you're linked with, and you can apportion your carbon data to. And then at the bottom here, you can see any historic data you've apportioned to various clients. So I'll take your attention first to the clients box here, which is the third box. What we can see here is we can see we are linked to 2 clients. I've very imaginatively for this demo called them School Partner and School Partner 2. You can see their names here in that table, and we can see that I'm linked to them since the 23rd of March, and we can see that the project is for the Climate Action Group, which is what we expect. This means that these 2 clients, named as School Partner and School Partner 2, once I've reported my carbon data, I can then apportion a percentage of my data to them. So if you only have these 2 clients, then you would only have these 2 in this list, but you might want to link to more clients. So as part of this setup, we've asked you to identify which organizations are your suppliers or your clients, and so we've established the relevant linkages between the different accounts. But in the future, you might get a new client or a new supplier, and so this is how you link to one another. So as a supplier, as a reporter, you would go to the pending request box and you would click on request new client access, and then here you get this drop down that opens up, and you get a list of all the various school partners that are part of a climate action group that you can select to be linked with. So let's say I want to be linked with Canary Wharf Group because they're one of my clients and I want to apportion some of my carbon data to them. I would click on Canary Wharf Group, I select a discipline, it's a user group, and I click on request access. That client will then receive an email saying that me as a supplier want I recognize myself to be a supplier of them and I want to apportion my carbon data. Are they happy with that? They need to approve it. So in this example, I've got two requests. I've got one with Canary Wharf Group as a partner, and the other one with Hepton Store Conversions. I'm going to ask my colleague Alfie, who's logged in as the Hepton Store Conversions account, to accept that request. And hopefully he's done it. I'm going to refresh my page, and we can see that now I've refreshed my page. I still have my pending request with Canary Wharf Group, but I can see that Hepton Store Conversions is now one of my clients. It's listed in this table. So that's another organization I can share my data with, apportion my data with. So once you've got the correct linkages and you want to apportion some of your data, you go to the box right at the top. And the first thing we would recommend is you look at the reporting period that you're setting this information for. So the period here we're looking at is 1st of April to 30th of June. If you open this drop down, you can select other periods. And then the next thing is you've got the list of your clients here and how much data you're apportioning to them. So for my carbon data I've reported in April, from the 1st of April 20 to 30th of June 20, so Q2. For the moment, I've said that the school partner, who's one of my clients, I've apportioned 30%, and then the supply chain school, I've apportioned 10% of them. If I want to add another client, I can open this up. I can click on add a client. I get a drop down here where I select my client. So Hepton Store Conversions, let's say that new client I've just added. Let's assume that 20% of my business was with them. I'm going to put 20% here. I'm going to save this, to the current reporting period. If I want to save these apportionment settings to all future reporting periods, I can do so. And then here that shows how I've apportion my data to my various clients. So 20% of my business was with Hepton Store Conversions, and that means that, so I've indicated that here. That means that 20% of my carbon emissions will be sent through, my absolute carbon emissions will be sent through to the Hepton Store Conversions account. So once I'm ready and I've listed all my clients for the period, and I've got all my apportionment data done and I saved it, all I need to do is go to the bottom of the page and submit to clients, and then I will get a table here that shows what percentage I've distributed to which client. So here we just in the first period I only attributed 30% to one client, so that's why that's the only one that's listed. But in this instance, I would get these three different clients with 20, 10%, and 30% for the Q2 period. I'm not going to do that now. It takes a couple of minutes for it to process. There is an on-screen message that tells you that it's loading, and just please keep the browser open, but navigate to elsewhere on another tab if you'd like to, just while the data's working in the background. It takes a couple of minutes, and then you get a confirmation message on your screen and a confirmation email. So this whole process it's relatively simple as soon as you've linked to the correct client accounts, and you can see which ones you've linked to here in this box here. And what we'll do is we've developed some very accurate sort of user guidance to tell you which steps you need to follow. But you'll see that once you've linked to the correct accounts and you know how to report your data, the apportionment doesn't take that long. It's just a case of entering the apportionment numbers here and then saving it and submitting to clients. That is all. So very rapidly, I'm just going to take you through what the output looks like from a client account. So I'm just going to flip over into a couple of client accounts. Here we can see data from the school partner for the Climate Action Group. This is their dashboard, and here we can see that they have a carbon tile, and underneath that they've got various indicators. The indicators are the KPIs that are measured thanks to the input data that you provide. And so we can see the various sort of carbon indicators. So we've got carbon from total electricity consumption, carbon from travel in car vehicles, carbon from travel logistics, etc. Various indicators that the client sets up. And then if we click on them, we can then see a graph. Here, in this case, it's just one, it's just data for one period, so for Q1 up to March 31st, 2020. And the data's only coming in from one supplier, the supplier that I submitted data for. What the client sees is the absolute values that was provided by that supplier times the apportionment percentage that supplier applied to that client. So I'm going to flick over to another account here as well, where you can see sort of, for carbon emissions, I can see scope 1 emissions for a project. What we can see is how that's progressed over time. The client in this instance has decided to input targets as well, which are the green and red lines you might see. And then here below, in the table below, we can see the various suppliers and how much do they contribute to the carbon emissions for that client. And so when several suppliers, several school members are reporting their carbon data to one client, the client, the partner will be able to see sort of a breakdown between each of those suppliers and which ones, how much absolute emissions are they contributing as each supplier. And we can see that breakdown in the table below. With the aggregation of that in the graph that sits above it. So there you go. So that section is what the clients will see. You will also get as a reporter, you will also get a dashboard that looks very much like this, but instead of being apportioned data, sort of only a percentage of the data you've reported, you'll see your full 100% of the data you've provided. So that's it. So I'll just check if I've got any questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen for now and try and address questions.
On what evidence a partner can see, or what information a partner can see from the contractor. So I'm just looking at the chat boxes about whether a partner can see a contractor's total turnover, revenue, gross internal floor area, for example, that make the relative emissions.
No, so a partner wouldn't see that. A partner only sees. A partner doesn't see any data you've used to normalize, that's been used to normalize your information. Mm-hmm. And importantly as well, a partner, when you apportion your data to a partner, the partner doesn't see the percentage that you've applied to them. So if you've apportioned, you gave an apportionment of 30%, the partner will not see that. They will just see the absolute figures. So let's say, for simplicity, you've entered information gives you 10 tons of carbon emissions, and you apportion 30% of that to a partner. The partner in their account will only see 3 tons of carbon emissions from you. They won't know whether that's 30% of your business or 1%.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a kind of patient-doctor confidentiality around some of this information, so it can be provided by the contractor to provide those numbers, that allocation and that calculation on relative. But in terms of how that's rolled up to the client above that, there is a level of confidentiality. So you see what you need to see. We've had a question a couple of times about different parts of businesses. We're quite happy to, with direct contact, understand how your different business units function if you want to have a bit more granularity. This has to be within reason, of course. If you've got 300 different business units, it's not going to work. But if you've got some, a handful of large business units within your organization, get in touch and we can talk about, the rail division, the commercial division, the FM division, and so on. So when a contractor goes in, they can see client partner organization, division X, division Y, division Z. And then there's a bit more granularity that will help you, and it will help the contractor as well. And that will be obviously restricted in terms of what the contractor can see, but with the right naming from you, we can sort that out. Okay, there's one other question specifically about refuse-derived fuel. That's where an organisation will be, it's in scope 1 because it's where an organisation might be using that fuel themselves directly within their own processes for heating, for energy production. So it's in scope 1 at the moment. Okay, I'm going to deal with a couple more questions and then I will see how much more we can fit in. So just bear with me a second, if you wouldn't mind, folks, while I look at some of these questions. Okay, in terms of the apportionment side of things, we've had a few discussions around this, and there's a concern about understanding what a contractor is doing and what they are delivering for their client. There was a concern around the confidentiality, particularly for procurement, but also understanding whether a contractor is wholly reliant on their client in terms of their business. We don't want to be getting into a situation where there's undue information provided. So the apportionment at the moment, and do bear in mind that this is a trial period, is in a way that we can get that apportionment from contractors up to clients, but without disclosing information that would be otherwise problematic. And I'm going to deal with one final question because I'm conscious, of course, that we've gone over our half hour, about contractors encouraged to report accurate data to their clients rather than allocating their business total impacts. A good question. What we're trying to do is make this as simple and straightforward as possible for the contractors to report their data once. So they're not reporting several times. It was discussed whether we have a system where a contractor can go in and do as is suggested by the question, where you go in and say, well, these emissions are allocated through these projects or these sites, these facilities to client X, whereas these other emissions over here are allocated to a different client on a different site. So they're allocated, but then you'd have to enter the data more than once. And with many organizations, that would be many, many times of entering the data. So what we're looking at doing is entering the data or keeping the data entry as streamlined as possible. So it's only entered once by the contractors. And then there's an allocation that happens within that based on the levels of business they do with their clients. Okay. I'm going to pause there. Thank you very much for being on the call. Thank you very much for your questions. We will be arranging another one of these, or at least one more of these, should you wish to join again, or if you have colleagues or other contractors you'd like to get involved. We'll be sending out details in the coming days for those. If you have any specific questions that you'd like to pick up with us on a one-to-one basis, do drop us a line. I'm going to guide you towards my colleague Alfred Gilbert in the first instance, Alfred at supplychainschool.co.uk, and we can collate those questions because there might well be some common themes coming through. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your attention and your patience with the platform as well, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.